Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. You can see we have a big crowd next door, and we're thrilled that it made you look like we were having a giant concert here. So we really appreciate you coming out on this nice evening. And we're very excited for this particular gallery talk, which is near and dear to my heart as a printmaker, and to celebrate one of our own faculty here at St. Petersburg College is just an absolute joy. So before we begin, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of this exhibition in the greater context of what's going on right now in our museum, and give you a little background on our very special guest speaker, Linda Berghoff. I am the executive director of the Leepa-Rattner Museum of Art and the curator, Christine Rank-Carter. And we have this wonderful one-hour program for you this evening, which Linda will speak about her experiences with Berghoff-Cowden Editions, and also we will have some time for questions and answers afterwards. Tonight we are proud to present Structure of Prints, the Dorothy Mitchell Collection. This selection of 15 contemporary screen prints weaves together the story of a partnership between the women-owned printmaking group Berghoff-Cowden Editions, which was run by Lois Berghoff and Dorothy Cowden, and the art collector Dorothy Mitchell, who supported their mission. Together, they helped Tampa Bay flourish as a major center for collaborative printmaking workshops. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, they collaborated with internationally known artists and pushed the medium of screen printing to new heights. In 2005, the Leepa-Rattner Museum of Art received this amazing gift from the Mitchell family, which includes 34 vibrant prints and production archives by artists Brad Davis, Frank Faulkner, Sam Gilliam, Roberto Juarez, Miriam Schapiro, George Sugarman, and Robert Zakanich. Structure of Prints complements Lerma's very special exhibition series that's going on right now called Building Legacies, Architecture and Design, which celebrates the finale of our 20th anniversary year and draws inspiration from our very own architect, Edward Hoffman, whose 40-year retrospective visioning structure is featured in our South Gallery as you enter the museum. Structure of Prints highlights Berghoff-Cowden Editions' masterful use of unconventional techniques to construct a print much like an architect would construct a building. This workshop encouraged artists to experiment with materials and techniques that included building layers, cutting and reassembling shapes, and folding edges. This transformed traditional screen printing from a two-dimensional medium into a three-dimensional construction made of paper, fabric, and collage. As this story comes full circle, we are incredibly grateful to our exhibition sponsor, Mary Mitchell Avery, whose support ensures this unique story and the legacy of this amazing partnership is kept alive here in our area. Tonight we have a very special guest, as I mentioned, Linda Berghoff, who is actually the daughter of Lois Berghoff, and she is an artist, printmaker, and professor of fine arts at St. Petersburg College's Tarpon Springs campus. Linda has a graduate degree in arts administration from Drexel University and a graduate degree in printmaking from Temple University Tyler School of Art. While studying abroad in Temple's Rome, Italy art program, she led an art and cultural exchange between Italian and American artists that resulted in an international exchange project, and she curated the exhibition Transiti Italiani, which traveled to venues throughout the United States. Linda has also taught at Newberry College in Boston, and she has exhibited nationally and internationally and has received awards in printmaking and several visual arts grants. Linda also served as an assistant at the Berghoff-Cowden print workshops, and tonight we are going to hear about some of her experiences working with these renowned artists, and we'll later open it up for questions so you can ask about some more experiences. So without further ado, please help me welcome Linda Berghoff.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. I appreciate it, and I think you'll enjoy it. As you can see, I am fully prepared for your questions, okay? So there we go. And excuse me for my reading, because I'm going to read a little bit because I want to be very factual about the information. A lot of detail involved, not only in the construction of the prints, but also the history of the workshop itself. But I want to thank a few people, especially Dorothy Mitchell, who was really involved with our mission. As Christine said, they were one of our sponsors. And also Jim Mitchell, which was her son. If it wasn't for Jim, we probably wouldn't have done it, because basically he was very instrumental in developing the interest. He had actually an antique gallery next to my parents' original gallery, which was in Tampa, which was Soho South Gallery. So they became friends, and then things developed from there. But Mary Mitchell Avery was wonderful to do this. I appreciate that. It was just a great thing for her to do, to sponsor it. And finally, I like to dedicate this gallery talk to my mother, Lois Berghoff, who was very instrumental and very important to me in my life. And not only as an artist, but as a printmaker and a mentor. And of course, my mother. Okay. Anyways, to get to the story of Berghoff-Cowden, it was a women-owned workshop. And what was interesting at that time period, they started the workshop in 1988, but it was a collaborative print workshop. So what does that mean? Well, it's a professional environment of artists that are master printers, okay? So you have master printers that have technical expertise. And with that, they, especially technical expertise in the terms of printmaking, the printmaking process. And some of you, I did write might want to read the essay that I wrote, so it's up there at the counter in the front of the museum. I wrote a essay on collaborative print workshops from 1960 to now, so if you would like to read that for the history of collaborative print workshops, it's at the front desk. So the gallery was owned by Lois Berghoff and Dorothy Cowden. They were pioneers. They opened it up in 1988. It was a small woman's press. My mother, Lois Berghoff, is her background, which I'll give you. She was a teacher. She taught at Tyler School of Art, by the way, in Philadelphia. She was also director of the Printmaking Council of New Jersey, which is still in existence. It goes by a different name now, but it's still in existence. And also Soho South Gallery, which some of you know of. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was actually one of the only contemporary art galleries in the area. USF students exhibited there all the time, graduate students, and it was very successful for many, many, many years. Along with my father, Jack Berghoff, we don't want to leave him out. And they had this gallery for many, many years. Anyway, my mother met Dorothy Cowden, and Dorothy Cowden was a teacher, artist, and gallery director at UT, University of Tampa, which is the Scarfo and Hartley Gallery. And they both met at the Art Alliance in Ybor City. And they became fast friends. And what happened after that is they had the idea of they both were interested in printmaking. My mother had a background in printmaking. Even though she was a painter, she was also a printmaker. And Dorothy was interested. And at that time, they thought, why not? And why not printmaking? So they decided screen printing. Well, Dorothy went to these workshops in Philadelphia and Penland on the new process in screen printing, which was the water-based inks. Before that, they were oil-based. So back in the late 80s and late 80s, they started to have these workshops in Philadelphia at the University of the Arts, which was run by Lois Johnson. My mother also knew Lois Johnson because it was Philadelphia area, and she was very aware of developing these water-based inks. So they decided to set up a workshop. And Carl, their son, well, I would say Dorothy's son, knew a lot about screen printing because he worked in a commercial press. So he knew oil base, but he was ready to do something different. So I talked to Dorothy before a couple of weeks ago when I was deciding how to put this together for a talk. And one of the questions I did ask Dorothy Cowden was, why did you and my mother do something like this? Why? What was the reasoning? And well, she said, we both loved printmaking. We wanted to do something that was collaborative, and also we didn't know any better. So that was one of the things that I thought was really funny, because they just jumped into it. They didn't really think about it too much. So they decided on screen printing. They liked the medium. It was a new medium at the time. And they decided, well, and I asked Dorothy, why screen printing? And I thought about it too. And of course, it was very much the point of being non-toxic. Because the development of screen printing at that time, they wanted something for schools. And the oil base was toxic. So everything started to come together. All right, Lois Johnson was the dean of printmaking at the University of Arts, and they wanted to develop screen printing inks that would be non-toxic for students. So basically, it was easy to set up. It cut costs. The variety of the visual effects you can get with screen printing was really interesting. And it was a fast, easy drying time and easy cleanup and a very low cost to run a workshop. So therefore, they decided to set this up. So before I even get any further, I want to talk about screen printing. So basically, the definition of screen printing, because I can't assume that you all know what it is, all right? Okay, is based on the concept of a stencil, which was known to be used in prehistoric times, making it one of the oldest graphic techniques. Basically, the process can be described as a stencil being adhered to a fine mesh screen. Screens used to be made from silk, but now many other materials are more commonly used, all right, like nylon, polyester, because of doing photo-based. That's why and silk breaks down. The image is transferred to the screen and the ink is forced through the mesh with a squeegee, and the ink prints through the open areas onto the paper beneath. Now we'll get into a little bit of history, which I think some of you will find interesting. So in the first half, or the last half of the 19th century, the stencil was applied to natural silk mesh attached to wooden frames, so silk screen. The pigment was pushed through the stencil and was generally similar to oil paint at that time period when printing on paper. Around the turn of the 20th century, a rubber blade squeegee pulls the ink through with a wooden handle was utilized for the process. During the WPA, does anybody know what the WPA was? Okay. The works in progress during the Depression from the years of 1935 and 1943, okay? When, of course, everybody who knows that time period, I don't know if there's anybody here, but the artists were developing new processes in screen printing because they were doing commercial work also. And while they were working in commercial screen shops, they were involved in a new process because a lot of them didn't know about the screen printing at that time, only for commercial. And they were making posters for war-related, so it had to do with that time period. The Philadelphia Museum of Art curator at that time, a little bit later, maybe about 10 years later, I should say, coined the word serigraphy. And in 1942, at that time period, it was, they decided to call it serigraphy, or he did, to coin that term because it was the word for silk writing. It was a definition that meant silk writing. So basically, the photo image making of the 1950s and 60s made things change in terms of what? pop art. In the 60s, it became popular again in terms of pop art. Andy Warhol was one of the artists that started to really use screen printing again. But all that was oil-based at that time period. It wasn't until later on in the 80s that the water-based. But that's where screen printing became very popular. But now they call it screen printing. They don't use silk screen that much at all because they don't use silk. They use the yellow polyester mostly because a lot of artists do photo silk screen, and the emulsion takes well on nylon mesh. Okay, so anyways, let's continue. All right, so basically, when we talk about screen printing, we're talking about something that's water-based, okay? And it is very, it can be, some of it is toxic, but that's when you go to the cleaning of screens. And so it's not completely safe except in the process of printing and the inks themselves, but in terms of the cleanup or the stripping of screens later on, that can be toxic. So you have to be very conscious of that when you're printing. Overall here, in terms of the exhibition and the artists, I want to give sort of an overview. Okay, I think you would like to know, before I get into detail, about certain prints. The artists, to continue with the workshop and the whole concept, the artists were invited to the studio for an intensive work of 2 weeks, a work session. Their major focus had often been both painting or sculpture, okay? So all the artists came from different mediums. Like George Sugarman was a sculptor. Ed Faulkner, Sam Gilliam were painters. Robert Sakanich over here was a painter. So they all came with different backgrounds, but some of them had experience in printmaking, mostly lithography and taglio, very rarely in screen printing. The screen print process and our use of the acrylic inks, well, they're water-based, they were acrylic, triggered their creative energies into new and exciting directions. They produced prints in small editions, unique variations, and monoprints, often using hand painting like Sakanich, which I'll get into later, Robert Sakanich over here, who did that vase, exotic papers, and fabrics, is Miriam Schapiro over there, as part of their process. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of all the artists. George Sugarman, right here behind me with the box, okay, Vanishing Landscape, and our famous Storm over Tampa, over there, to just suggest a few. There's another one over there. He created a powerful group of folded and cut out images, some folded before and some after printing. Sam Gilliam, over in the corner over here, he recently passed away, by the way, wonderful artist. Editions were variable, meaning that each one was like a monoprint. Even though he would start out with a base concept or a background and multiple prints that were the same in the backgrounds, he varied each one. He changed colors when he added more layers of the screen process, okay? So there were variables. And of course, he was very expressive in his work by cutting, stitching, and adding collage elements. Robert Sakanich, and he likes to go by Robert Rahway Sakanich because that's where he's from, Rahway, New Jersey. So every time, he's always told me and other people that you must say Rahway, whether he's here or not, okay? So his was very intense, and he mixed colors very intuitively. Even as the print was coming through the press, he would actually do the hand painting. So it was interesting how he worked. Very expressive, very complex work. And of course we have Miriam Schapiro over here on the right, and she was fascinated by the colors of screen printing. They were very layered, lots of layers. Some of the, when I go specific to talk about them, they were like 11 to 12 colors, so that's a lot of screens. Fabrics, paper collage flowers, and of course, a lot of the fabrics were transparent, and she would, actually when she came to print, she brought her own fabric. She brought her own rick-a-rack, which is on the dancer. Okay, so she was prepared. Brad Davis over here with the chair print right here, chair in the garden. Okay, his background is Japanese. Well, he was Chinese art, Japanese art. He used a lot of Japanese papers. Okay, almost like Shinkalei, if you know intaglio printing, but it wasn't, but it gave that look of Shinkalei, okay? But he was always very subtle with his beautiful colors. Frank Faulkner, which is the two right here, Palm 1 and Palm 2, and also the piece behind me, right here, okay? He embellished with gold and silver Prismacolor and delicate layers of pearlescent colors. And I was fortunate to work with him quite a bit, just like with a couple of the other artists when I was living in New York. And he was a real character. It's fun to work with. We have Roberto Juarez over here, and he used flock peace moss. And flock, did you hear what I said? Okay. It's peat moss, so what do you think? Pretty interesting, right? Okay. Japanese papers printed on both sides. The peat moss was used for its color. He wanted a certain brown color, and it was sifted very thinly to create a flocking. The papers are layered with hand painting and coated with liquid urethane, and he used a lot of floral images. A lot of these artists were influenced by Florida and the landscape and the environment. So what I decided for this talk, little lecture, whatever, I wanted to focus on 3 artists in detail. Not that I won't talk about the others if you ask questions or whatever, but to talk about each work of art, we'll be here for 2 or 3 hours. And so I try to make it very concise, But why these 3 artists? Well, I visually made it, I kept looking at the work, and I'm very familiar with all this work, but I was thinking about it in a different way. I visually made associations with the title and theme of both exhibitions. This is the structure of prints, all right? Ed Hoffman was visioning of structure, right? Visioning structure. So it had a lot to do with the word structure. And I wanted to make I was making this association. Also, in addition, each artist translated their medium to create exceptional prints. So therefore, like someone like George Sugarman coming into the process of printmaking as a sculptor, Miriam coming into the process of screen printing as a painter, Sam Gilliam as a different kind of painter coming into screen printing. And they brought that medium into the work they did, which I found very interesting in working with them. So I'm going to start with George Sugarman. Okay, I'm going to give a little story, and then we'll talk about the specific prints. George Sugarman was one of our older artists. He was also the first artist we printed. And a little bit about his background, because I won't go into extensively, but just it's nice to know a little bit about an artist's background. He didn't come into art until he was in his late 30s, 39, 40 years old. And he served in World War II, the Navy, and he traveled through Europe for many, many years, several years, and he was very much fascinated by Baroque architecture. And he was fascinated he was struck by Baroque sculpture and architecture because its sense of formal abundance, especially the architecture in Rome. When he returned to the United States, he decided to challenge sculpture in a new way, because always sculpture was on the pedestal, or really seen on the pedestal, pretty much. And he was thinking about sculpture in a different way. So he began melding color and form and creating these irregular shapes out of wood, painting them in bright, bright, bright colors. And he was very much influenced by a certain painter. And I was glad to see that the painter is in the exhibition, Stuart Davis. So Stuart Davis was one of Sam's favorite artists. And after you look at his work, go back and look at Stuart Davis and see if you can find some associations there. To quote George Sugarman, what would happen, this is how he thought about sculpture, and you'll see how it kind of flows into the way he did prints. What would happen if I put sculpture on the floor, I put it on the ceiling, I got rid of the pedestal or integrated it. I used color. I extended its relationships into space in all directions. He fashioned the freedom in which eccentric forms could proliferate. So think about that when you look at his work. He literally rethought sculpture from the inside out. He challenged convention on the deepest level, as he did with the prints that he did at Berghoff-Cowden. When he first came to work with us in terms of the print project, he hadn't made a print, lithos mostly, since the 60s. So like his sculpture, the prints are, as you can see, are very playful, inventive. One thing you might notice, like in the flat over fold, also when you get a chance, if you go around the corner and look at the print over here, he uses this motif of a figure, okay? It's like a abstracted figure, sitting figure. And I think that comes from his Italian days, all right? And he worked very loosely when he worked with the prints, but he manipulated the prints in various ways. He approached the prints as sculpture, and he also created a lot of small maquettes, these small little sculptures, and he was very comfortable with working with paper. So when he came to print with us, you could see how he was very comfortable with the papers. He also not only did sculpture, he did wall reliefs and relief collages. And he was very comfortable, like I said, with paper. And I was lucky enough to meet him about a year or two before he passed away in New York, because I was living there in Soho area. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with Soho, on Bond Street there. He was an old man, he was, I think, late 80s or 80s, and he had a loft that was 3 stories, and it was all steps. You had to go up all these steps. But when I got to his studio, he had maquettes everywhere. Maquettes in the kitchen, maquettes in the bathroom, and his studio was amazing with all these little sculptures, almost like little toys. So it was very fascinating to be in his studio. If you notice, and also with some of the prints, the folding that he does, well, he folds before printing, but he also folded after printing. So when you look at some of them, try to guess what he did first, because it's kind of interesting. Also, something I didn't realize, I found this out recently, is that his father was a rug dealer. And he was a rug dealer for Persian Oriental rugs. So therefore, he grew up, he used to travel with his dad, and so therefore he was very much fascinated by Islamic art and that look. So you kind of see that influence in his work too. So one quote I would like to tell you about George is, you kind of relate it to prints, even though it was about his wall reliefs and his colleges. The collages, think about the prints now, have many affinities with sculpture. Many of the forms have a small but actual depth, which comes from building up the surface, layer by layer, of paper. But more important, the shapes have been placed in a spatial field whose lines of face are forced to keep them together and pull them apart, creating a relationship that enforces the significance of each shape. So now I'm going to talk about the prints, some of the prints. So we have Storm Over Tampa, which is against the that back wall there, okay? And if you get a chance, you can look at it really well, okay? He created these quick brush strokes on Mylar, all right? But he was fascinated by what he saw in terms of the sky and the storms, and he was very much inspired by the ominous movement of storm clouds as they build power over Tampa Bay. He wanted to harness the energy in a dramatic, abstract image that progressively moves across 5 sheets of paper, becomes engulfed in an increasing dark field, creating a compelling interpretation of the impending storm. He did quick brushstrokes, and actually, what he used to do when he came to visit, he did a lot of the drawings and painting with a wet medium, not the ink per se, but I forgot really what it was, but on the Mylar. I think it was like a tush, they call it in lithography. It's like a ink on Mylar in his hotel room. So he would do them in his hotel room. So he was what you call an art monk. He was an artist. He worked 24/7. All he thought about his whole life was art. So it was very understandable why he would go to his, he'd take it with him back to the hotel room and work. And he was just that kind of an artist. But the fascination of these pieces is like a film strip. All right, when you think about a film strip, and he was trying to create this sort of time frame. If we talk about Vanishing Landscape, it was printed first and then folded. And that's the print that's right over here with the blue, green, and pink, okay? All right? And it was printed first and folded. He used colorful landscape forms for this print on Japanese mulberry paper. As you see, the right sheet after printing is folded several times to create its own shape as it recedes into a formal horizon. It was printed first and then folded. And it's different with the flat over fold. But first we'll talk about the box. All right, we'll talk about that before here. The box was sculpturally constructed, the print folded, mounted, and hand painted, and the box part was adhered. So the box part was adhered, separate, okay? Very, very, very different. Storm Over Tampa and Flat Over Fold is over here, if you get a chance, if you can see it, some of you, okay? It was folded first, then printed, and it combines elements of printing and sculpture in vertical diptych. Both sheets are printed with expressive, energized image. The top is in 2 colors and flat. The lower is in 3 colors and folded. The relief image below emerges as a sculptural form and in a unique shape which creates its own energy and contrasts dramatically with the flat form above. So moving on, okay, I would like to touch base with the next artist, which is Miriam Schapiro over here, okay? Miriam, of course, was a leading figure in the feminist art movement. She has had a profound impact in the art world. She is recognized internationally as a leader of 2 art movements, the feminist art movement and the pattern and decoration movement. But also other artists were involved with the pattern and decoration movement. Robert Sakanich, by the way, was a leader of it. They used to meet together in Soho at Miriam's loft, okay? And also, I think Joyce Kozloff was another one. A mover and shaker in the feminist art movement that erupted in the 70s, Miriam developed her own singular style of collages, which was collage in the feminist style, using materials like lace, doilies, ribbons, and floral fabrics, and works that celebrate the tradition of domestic handiwork, of course, of anonymous women. Along with other artists influenced by bold ornamental images, she was also a founder, of course, one of the founders of the pattern decoration movement in the 70s, bringing decorative feminist elements into the realm of high art when we talk about pattern and decoration, when we talk about the pattern decoration movement. She was very experimental when she came to the workshop, and she loved to use a variety of materials and media. She very much experimented. Like I said earlier, she brought her materials to Berghoff-Cowden, including the fabrics and, of course, on both prints there. She embraced materials very much so, very tactile. And she wanted to always have their remnants, to always address the remnants of women's past lives. She named a lot of the women artists that she did in terms of prints, she wanted to give them badges of honor, okay? And she renamed the term collage to femage, as like I said, because of the idea of using feminist materials relating to the domestic arts. But one thing I liked about Miriam is she was really a collaborator. She loved to collaborate. She was also nosy. She liked gossip. She wanted to know what was going on about everybody in the workshop, who was doing what to who, or who was going out with what, and she was really funny that way. She created artworks honoring women, of course, artists from the past, giving them heroic status, especially Russian artists, especially Russian women artists, between the years of 1970 and 25. She was very much fascinated by that time period because there was the women Russian artists were very, they did theater, dance. They're not only visual artists, they were also involved with politics. So they were very significant to her. And she was also, her background was Russian. So she always wanted to celebrate the women from the past, like Frida Kahlo, Sonia Delaunay. So they were all people that she recognized or wanted to honor from the past, women artists, but not necessarily. Some were writers, some were in theaters. So when we look at the figures over here, one of them, she loved dance and she loved opera. And when you look at Alexandra and me in this particular piece, Alexandra was a Russian artist, okay? So, but she also, she did theater and performance art and whatever. So she's dressed in a certain kind of costume. And on her pieces, she wanted to actually give them a defined tactile sense. And so she would use fabrics, and she would take the fabrics and lay them over the one color. The fabrics were very transparent, laid on top, so the color underneath would blend into the fabrics. Same thing with the fan. The fan is interesting I'll talk about it in a minute. But Miriam, before I get to that, Miriam was a printmaker in a sense. She knew a lot about printmaking. She actually took a lot of printmaking classes as a student. So she not only was a painter, she was also a printmaker. When we talk about the fan now, it's called In the Heat of Winter, and it's her largest fan to date. And it's spliced in the middle because our printmaking bed, or the screen print bed, all right, where you do the prints, wasn't big enough. So we had to do two of them, all right, separately and match it, okay? Not easy, okay? It's 32 by 64 inches, and I say that because I wanted to let you know how big it is. Miriam's early paintings were grounded in geometric structure, and so you can see that sort of coming through in the fan itself. She was always fascinated by geometric structure and all her work, Mm-hmm. The dancer, Alexandra and Me, gives you an example of her use of the female figures, okay? And usually the fabric is always really embellished, all right? So that's what you get a sense of that when you look up close, especially with the rickrack around the fan. Miriam used the dance, or the idea of the dance, as a metaphor for the creative act. Now, we're going to go and discuss Sam. Sam is over here in the corner, okay? And his 3 works, all right? So Sam Gilliam is he just recently passed away about a month ago, internationally acclaimed artist. Sam Gilliam effectively liberated the painting surface from a flat plane with his draped canvas paintings. So he's really noted for his draped canvas painting. Some of you I know who he is. He's been in the the Venice Biennial twice, okay? And he was an African-American artist, by the way. He did these huge draped canvases. And it was well known, he was well known for these canvases in the 60s and 70s. He wanted to transform the medium of painting and its relationship to the spatial, and he always took in consideration the architectural context of the environment of where you could see and view his work. Sam was born in Tupelo, Mississippi. I hope I said that right. He spent his childhood in Louisville, Kentucky. He went to school for art there, undergraduate and graduate. Then he moved to Washington, D.C., and he was known as one of the artists, a group of artists that were part of the Washington Color School, or also they call it the color field painting, which was a style of painting, pouring layers of acrylic paints on unprimed canvas, like they called it also lyrical abstraction, okay. He earned international recognition, of course, in the Venice Biennale in 1972, and also again in 2017 for a very beautiful site-specific public commission. And that's what he focused in on later on life. For decades, Sam was actually of all the artists I worked with, he was very much over the years experimented with printmaking. So for him coming to the studio was very natural of all the artists. He continued his interest in multi-layered, colorful shapes, forms in the print medium, as you can see here. He completed a series of exceptional screen prints at Berghoff-Cowden. Each of the variable editions have common relationships of shape, color, and texture, yet each print is unique. All are multicolored, bleed abstract images energized by vibrant colors and rays of color and light. The prints are cut and reassembled. Collaged shapes and forms overlap as they are stitched and glued together to create a tension between surface and space. There are sudden shifts of raked textures, cut strips, and irregular edges, or printed images stitched to the surface. Transparent overlays of ink pull out subtle tones of textured surfaces on the textured surfaces. The added buildup of paper, stitching, and inks gives an object quality and a dramatic presence to the work. These prints are about printing and control pushed to the edge. One thing interesting about Sam when he came to print is that he brought these interesting mylars, or photo images already shot on mylar, of that he wanted to photo silk screen on the different screens. And they were large industrial fans. So a lot of the scratching, the white area, like the first one over here on the left, is from that. So it looks like it's scraping, but it's from the large industrial fans. He also collected toys, little toys, and he photographed the different parts of toys. So, and then he had them made into negatives on mylar or whatever, and we used those also in the prints. So he did those photo images. So, Anyway, in conclusion, with the prints in the exhibition, I would like to talk a little bit about something else. Berghoff-Cowden was really exceptional at the time period, especially for a collaborative print workshop, especially at that time. It was very open to experimentation with the artists, and all the artists had the freedom to push the medium in a totally free and creative environment. Before taking questions, I thought I'd try something, okay? And I would like you to tell me whether an artist, I'm going to give you a quote, and I would like you to tell me whether an artist, one of the artists here, could have said the quote, or had Ed Hoffman, the architect. Okay? The first quote is, my goal, well, this one you'll know pretty much, but then you'll still have to pick out who. All right. My goal is to deconstruct, reimagine, or repurpose. That's one of the things a painting can do. I didn't want to leave a blank, so it's kind of hard to understand the quote then. I think that's what good architecture does. It repurposes space. It enacts transformation. So who do you think could say that? Hoffman. No, Sam Gilliam. Okay. Another quote. Space for me is the mystery which shapes all things, but is in turn created by the things it has shaped. Very good. You get a lollipop. All right. Number 3. Now some of you better know this one, especially if you looked at both exhibits. Good design always reinforces the mission. Great design sometimes becomes the mission. Ed Hoffman. Okay, so do you see what I mean by the transformation, the association? When you go back and forth and you look at both exhibitions, the whole idea of structure. And what does that mean to an artist, an architect? One and the same, really, a lot of ways. Thank you very much. Okay. Now I'm ready to take questions. Andrea, she's my student, another student.
So how much extra credit am I getting?
Yeah. Well, now you're asking a question. It depends on the question.
That's a good question, though. I remember in class you were telling us that piece right there.
Which one is that?
The one right there with the film like that.
Oh, the box?
No.
Or this one over here? Oh yeah, Frank Faulkner's piece.
What were you saying that the blue one, right in front of the storm, the storm.
Oh yeah, oh that one. Yeah, Storm over Tampa.
Were you telling us that artists in particular like to do something with their thumb, like they like to leave an accent?
Oh, you're talking about Robert Sakanich. Yes, those are fishing lures. Okay, and he used a lot of stencils. So he was very painterly. So he basically was a stencil, and he used those are fishing lures, okay. But with the thumbprints, well, he was very intense the way he painted, and he would leave fingerprints and splots and all that. And if you left a fingerprint, he was upset. He said, "You get that out of there." And I said to him, "Well, what's all over here?" He said, "Those are my fingerprints. They stay there, yours don't." That's right, you remember, that's what you remember, yeah.
That I have to interject something really quickly. So as a printmaking student, and screen printing was my jam, that's what I love to do. And that's the first thing that you learn is how to clean up your prints, because yeah, it's inevitable you're gonna get a splash or something, but you learn to scrape away that ink. That water-based ink is very forgiving for the most part on that heavy paper, and so you try to scrape it away. And I don't know how many like blue fingerprints that I tried to scrape away and then sand it down, and then you buff it out. No one was the wiser. So that's interesting though, that he would leave his own.
Yes, and that was part of the print, you know, because he wanted to leave some of the process where it came, the history.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay, I'm not even sure that's working.
You go ahead.
I'll shout, okay. I just wanted to say that I'm a little bit confused about the word stencil, and I'm wondering how that fits into lithography and all the
About
other-
what? Can't
how
hear
it
you.
fits into
Lithography?
lithography.
Well, you don't use a stencil in
I know,
lithography.
I
Yeah.
I don't recall having heard that term before, so is there any way you can briefly describe what that is?
Well, the stencil is just as, it can be anything really. It blocks out the ink. You can lay it down anywhere. Okay, look, well, in prehistoric times, okay? All right, the hand was a stencil, blocking out. Well, they used to blow the pigments, and that creates a blockout, a stencil. Okay. Mm-hmm. A negative, exactly. Thank you, Jose.
Oh, well, I have a question. I don't know if I need that, but I'm just curious how did they procure the artist? How did they decide? Was there always a prior connection, or were there cold calls made?
That too, both. Well, some of you know George Sugarman when he did the sculpture on Ashley. Okay. He also had an exhibition at the University of Tampa. Earlier, a year or so earlier. Don't get me wrong, I don't know the exact dates. So, and of course the Berghoff-Cowden just started. So, and of course Dorothy had his exhibition at UT, so he was one of the first artists. And of course he wanted to print. So that's how that happened. But of course, he knew a lot of these artists, because I hope George gets his recognition again someday, because he was very popular back in the day, like in the 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. But anyway, he knew a lot of these artists. Like Brad Davis Brad Davis right here was his assistant. He was his studio assistant. Judy Pfaff, the famous artist Judy Pfaff, was also a very good friend of his. We were trying to get her to come print. But no, a lot of the, and then of course, my mother knew some of these artists too, like Miriam, because we lived in New York for a while, and she kind of knew some of these people too. And Dorothy and my mom worked very well together, and they liked this. They had the same taste, so it was easy. And of course, Frank Faulkner. Sorry, Frank, because he passed away too. He was a friend of Jim Mitchell. Actually, he met Jim Mitchell in New York. And Jim Mitchell said he wanted him to come down and print. So that's how that happened. So it was like a connection, that way. And I'm trying to think who else. Sakanich was someone that my mother knew about. And she, if you notice, every artist pushed the medium. And we wanted to push it. And they really pushed, and that was different because we gave them total freedom to do that. And we were learning at the same time because they wanted to do things that, well, we don't know if that's going to work or not, but we'll do it. We'll try it. So, hey, Patty. Oh.
Quick. Is it working? It's working.
Is this working okay?
Well,
Am I working okay? Yeah.
That piece right there.
This one?
Yes. You said something you said there was a certain chemical or something
Yes.
at the end, and I wanted to know more.
I thought somebody would ask me that.
Here I am.
Well, I had to, you got to remember it was some time ago, so I brought all the documentation of each print. So I'll tell you exactly,
Okay.
all right? So it was a hand-pulled screen print of 11 colors with the non-toxic inks. It was printed front and back on layered akawara and koshi Japanese papers over flocked peat moss. Okay, they sifted it. Okay, Carl did. He was actually supposed to come tonight, but they sifted the peat moss. I wanted him. He would be even better to explain it. Okay, he was our master printer, by the way. And he sifted it and created a flocking so it would adhere to the paper. And a lot of hand painting on that with the acrylic inks and permanent dyes. so it'd bleed. But they did it on both sides. He did it on both sides. Some on one side, some on the other, and the print was laminated. So it's like one sheet of paper of images, another sheet of paper, and they were laminated and he used a liquid urethane only because, and he had to be careful, he had to wear a gas mask, one of those masks when he applied it.
What is that liquid urethane?
It's a sealant.
Like what you put on your floor.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And it made the paper look a certain way, like it was old, like it was, or had a certain character to it.
One last question.
He did that with his paintings too, by the way.
All right. You had said something, you had said about Miriam, and I kind of generally know, but specifically you said she worked, of course, in the feminist tradition. So would you explain a little bit more about what the feminist tradition is?
Good question.
Well, her whole concept was about women's identity. And that not only in the term of the current artists working, like some of us, but also in terms of women's identity from the past. Okay? And she wanted to show that it was collaborative. She tried to make it very collaborative. That hasn't really changed in some ways. Okay? The way, the power of that identity. And so she was really interested through her whole life, even up until the time, before she passed away, she was very much interested in that concept.
So the feminist tradition is thinking about feminism and utilizing
The past and the present. Like the identity to her was one and the same. Okay, the time period. I'm talking about time period. Okay, between the past, like with the Russian women artists, she was so fascinated with that time period and made it relate to the present because of the political in it. So she was trying to. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so
like they're
they're
partners.
Yeah. It's not materials. It's not subject matter. It's just
It was
the feminist tradition of bringing women with you
back
just
and
like
forth
tradition
and
of
sharing
art
and
history.
collaborating with them from what she knew from their
So
past.
that would be a collaborative mindset that the feminist tradition has,
Exactly.
and she was part of it.
And remember I said collaboration was very important, and that even meant collaboration with the past.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you could even say some of those collaborative, truly women-made type of fine crafts. I mean, obviously she incorporated, she had a love for textiles and a collection of different textiles and her grandmother's handkerchiefs and whatnot. But she was really taking those traditionally female crafts and exactly domestic is the perfect word from that only women were known to do, like quilt making and crocheting and whatnot, and really elevated that into the contemporary lifestyle and embracing some of those traditions that women were known for ages. Since men weren't really using that, women really took that for themselves as their identity, and then sort of the feminist art movement was born out of that. But so she's still so influential today in taking, for young female artists to kind of embrace that feminine side.
Yes. And she was also very collaborative in the community. It wasn't just like that making art, the imagery of art, but in the community. She went around the country giving workshops. It was that kind of thing, involved with women. So it was a whole philosophy, way of being with her. Yeah. You have a question, Patty?
How did Berghoff-Cowden decide on the number of impressions in each edition, especially since many of these prints are so different, like the Sugarman would have been so difficult to print a high number?
Yes. We kept the editions small. Well, about usually 40. And the whole idea was, they worked intensively in the workshop, and then sometimes they would go home and work on them some more and send them back and forth, like with Sam and like with Frank Faulkner. And some of them were, George was very prolific. He was constantly working 24/7. There's a lot of his prints that I don't think that were that I have, that were pretty amazing. But yeah,
40.
Yeah, 40. But some of them did like an edition of so many that they were exactly like the previous one. For instance, like with some of Frank's, or some of Brad Davis's here. But someone like Sam, each one was different. That's why they call it a variable. Like the basic concept looks similar, but then you can see the manipulation. And one thing about Sam with the stitching is that where we were located in Tampa there, next to the University of Tampa, next door was where they made bomb bags. Body bags and bomb bags. And they had these industrial sewing machines. And my father was very, he knew everybody. My dad knew, he talked to everybody. And the landlord told him that was next door. And of course, when Sam Gilliam found out, he was so excited that we would carry the prints over to there, and they would stitch them up on the industrial sewing machine. So we have a lot of those little stories. And Miriam used to come with her fabric. I used to cut her hair in the shop, that kind of stuff. She would collect the hair, actually. I don't know what she did with it. They all were characters, let me tell you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So obviously I know nothing about any of this, so this is all educating to me. So when I have some prints that are numbered, 1 out of so many or 400 out of so many, is that a different kind of?
I don't know, I have to see it. It's an edition of something,
So is it that?
they did so many.
And as it goes along, does the quality diminish?
No.
Using it so many times?
No, not if it's numbered.
Yeah.
If you're good at it.
If you're good at it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, definitely. But they'll say whether it's a there's a whole thing that I always have to refer to. I even brought it, actually. Okay, what an edition, okay, when you're talking about an artist proof, okay, all right, the artist proof. So there's always different labels on the prints. You got to pay attention to that, especially in terms of the quality. Yeah, but artist proof is fine.
Jose, did you?
Yeah, one quick question. I've always wondered, because in Tampa, the other very well-known print atelier, of course, was Graphic Studio at USF. And I'm so glad that you opened and stressed the fact that Berghoff-Cowden was a women-owned business with a feminist sort of bent. And I'm just curious, I was always curious, because I wasn't around in the 80s. Was there like a perceived, not competition, but was there any kind of was there any sort of...
No. You want to hear the story?
Yeah, I would love to, because I always thought of Graphic Studios being so macho. It's like, I don't even
Well,
know when they
yeah.
invited the first woman.
Well, Donald Saff, yeah.
Did they?
Well, my mother and father, my mother saw an exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, and they were living up in New Jersey, and she saw an exhibition of Graphic Studio prints. So, and that was that, and whatever. And then a few years later, they moved down here. And my mother purposely went to Graphic Studio. That's when the seeds were planted for her idea of a workshop. And she met everybody over there. And everybody liked my mother. She had a way. And she kind of just honed right in and knew all the different directors. I can't even remember them all. But Margaret Miller and my mother became very good friends. And was it somebody, Mr. Hine, was his last?
Hines was there.
Yeah, my mother, you know. So there was never a competition. Actually, my mother was an appraiser, so she would appraise a lot of the prints. They wanted her to appraise. Same thing at the Contemporary Art Museum in Tampa.
So there was a mutual respect between.
Yeah, they had a lot of respect. Margaret Miller really respected my mother because she started Soho South Gallery with my dad. And it was the only gallery in the area that had really interesting contemporary art at that time. That was the 80s.
Right.
There was nothing around then. So, and we exhibited a lot of USF. I think Elizabeth was one of them. She was one of the artists that we exhibited at Soho South. Jeff Whipple, remember Jeff Whipple? And a few artists, yeah.
Well,
So.
I'd like to hear that talk. About the gallery.
Oh, Soho South?
Yeah.
Oh.
Are there pictures? That'd be fun.
Yeah.
We'll have to do a retro.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Soho South Gallery was next. This is how we met Jim Mitchell. Soho South Gallery was next to their antique gallery.
Right.
And of course, my father went over and chit-chatted with Jim, and they became friends. My dad was a networker, and he became friends with Jim Mitchell, and Jim Mitchell got interested in the art, because he has a background in art. He was an art historian, by the way. And they became friends, and then one thing led to another. Got his mother interested, and the rest is history.
So when
Yeah.
Soho South closed, the Berghoff-Cowden Gallery opened? Or?
For a while there, it was simultaneous.
Oh, okay.
Like
Separate spaces?
separate spaces. Soho South, they still had Soho South while they were running the workshop, both my mother and father. And my father worked, of course, but my mother was the boss. And same thing with Berghoff-Cowden. Dorothy and my mother were the boss. Yeah. My father was he was like the rest of us, assistants. My dad was the colorist. He did all the mixing. So
Fascinating.
it was a family, situation. Both Dorothy's family with Carl and Berghoff family. So
Well, you became an artist.
yeah,
And your brother is involved with the arts too, isn't he?
yeah, Philip, the youngest. Yeah. Okay.
Well, everybody, I think we're over time now, but what a great conversation. Thank you so much.
You guys did good. You did good.
Thank you. We want to thank you all, and thank you, Linda, for such a really informative talk and so interesting. And we'll definitely have to turn this into a series. I see a whole bunch of talks happening off of this.
Well, also you being a background in printmaking, we could do, of course, some interesting talks. Yes.
I think this would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we
We'll
go.
get it- we'll get
The
it going.
Printpalooza was, Patty and I know that one.
Well, we thank you all for being here, and
And thank you, students. Oh, Susan must have left.
oh, there's some students here. That's amazing.
Extra credit.
And we want to, of course, thank the Mitchell family for this amazing gift to our community, and the fact that this world-renowned print shop was just a few miles down the street from here just blows me away. And we're very, very lucky to have this collection, and we have other exhibitions planned in the near future to feature other works from this collection for pattern and decoration movement and many other things. So it's being used all the time, and I hope that everyone who is now up there knows that they're looking down on us and seeing that we're celebrating them pretty much with every exhibition we do. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. And thank you, Linda.
Thank you. It's great.